Due to this now, it's a crisis that repeats itself with devastating consequences. Delays in funding to critical NGOs across Gauteng. As winter tightens its grip, shelters for abused children, care homes for people with disabilities and substance abuse treatment centres are running on empty. Joining us is Vetten, Chairperson of the Gauteng Crisis Care Committee, to unpack the human cost of the Department of Social Development's ongoing delays. Lisa, appreciate your time this afternoon. Now, what's the current status of the SLA issuance and payments to NGOs?
Well, there are two slightly different sets of issues going on. We issued our press release at the end of last week and have been trying to follow up with the Department of Social Development. So in the course of this week, there has been some movement. Some organisations have finally got service level agreements. And in fact, one organisation who appeared on Newzroom Afrika on Monday this week actually got called after her appearance and has since had her issue sorted out by the department. So there's been a little bit of movement. Where there is still, I think, quite a good deal of conflict is the drop-in centres for children and the home and community-based care and home and community-based care services to people with HIV and AIDS, as well as orphans and vulnerable children. That's a group of well over 100 organisations headed up by the children's sector, and as I understand it, they're still in dispute with the department.
Now, can you explain how these funding delays affect day-to-day operations, particularly where these young children are concerned?
They become very serious because, they're firstly the issues around food. Do you have enough to eat? So, the organisations then need to go begging to their local churches, their local supermarkets, their local businesses in order to help keep them going. And they have to prioritise things like food over things like staff salaries. So staff end up not being paid, which has knock-on effects on them, their ability, for instance, to pay their children's school fees, their children's transport to school, their ability to pay things like their medical aids, any other monthly orders that they have. But staff keep coming because they are committed. However, they often end up working only half-time, or some do have to stop working. And the knock-on effect of that is that children become very disillusioned and mistrustful because often they've been removed from parents in difficult situations, so they already have difficulty trusting. They're put in a new environment. One day their social worker is here, the next day their social worker isn't. There's another social worker. They don't see a social worker for a while. It creates enormous instability and mistrust, and it only aggravates, I think, the ability to work with children who have been traumatized and abused. And then, of course, I think there are other issues that come up just in relation to electricity. The one facility that for people with disabilities, for instance, they have been given a reprieve for 10 days, which is about to run out before they have their electricity cut. They have to go and do things like beg security companies to please just hold off before they withdraw their services from them. So there's a whole range of hidden human costs that we just don't see.
So a lot of this conversation is really about what the Gauteng government is failing to do. But let's go back a couple of steps and talk about the service level agreements. Have the various NGOs adhered to or abiding by what is expected in those agreements?
They do what they can. So there are two things to start to just remind people of. Is that last year the Premier actually said that a technical task team needed to be set up between NPOs and the department in order to come to an SLA that was mutually agreeable to both parties, as well as to develop a funding model that was mutually agreeable to both parties. The department stopped that task team from stopped meeting with that task team in October. So there never has been an agreement around an SLA and a funding model that is acceptable to both. So that's the first problem, is that the department reneged on that. The second issue, now the department has, just earlier this week, the acting head of department I saw on Michelle Craig's show, was saying that organisations were non-compliant, their members had not been vetted in terms of the National Register for Sex Offenders. What he did not mention was that the department was well aware of these problems even in March this year. And the problems really emanate from the fact that the Department of Justice has a 2 to 3 month backlog in being able to vet and issue certificates to organisations. Recognising that, and that it was beyond organisations' control, the department actually, in mid-April, granted a 3-month condonation till the end of June for organisations to get their certificates while they worked with the Department of Justice in order to speed up and get the processes going. So, I think there's a lot that gets left out about the fact that much of the difficulties that organisations have are well beyond their control. They are often the result of the failures of other departments, like the Department of Justice. Another example is municipalities, who delay in issuing things like certificates for bylaw compliance, or ask, for building plans that can cost in excess of 300,000 rand. No organisation has that kind of money. Some of these organisations don't get more than 120,000 rand a year to run feeding schemes for children. Where are they going to find 300,000 rand? So a lot of the so-called non-compliance is the issue of much deeper systemic problems, which needs the Department of Justice to get involved, local government to get involved, Department of Health to get involved, and Department of Social Development to get involved in order to take a more developmental and supportive approach. I mean, at the end of the day, when you shut down a service, what about the people who are using that service? What's the plan for them? Do they now just do without the service? So I think there's got to be a much more developmental approach taken in future rather than this punitive approach that shuts down the organisation, people lose their jobs and people lose their services. That's not helpful.
Lisa, you indicated that following a story that we had on the channel a few days ago, there was some activity last week and certainly movement for many of the non-governmental organisations that obviously were threatened by closure. Did you get a sense that this reaction by the department was a result of publicity and that potentially people are in the department are sitting on their hands and not doing the work that they should be doing?
I wish I knew what went on in the department, because one is very aware that there are people in the department who do their best. There are social workers who follow up daily with the relevant officers in the provincial office in order to try and get organisations paid. So I don't want to dismiss their efforts. But otherwise, one just cannot work out what is going on. Because there are others who simply never even respond to an email with an explanation. And this is why one reaches the point because it's now June. Payments should have started happening in April. No response is being obtained. This is why organisations then turn around and go to the media, because they've exhausted all options. And, you know, really going to court every time is not a long-term option either. There's a systemic problem that needs to be fixed once and for all. And I think also we can't have these kinds of crises every year as well. So I think there is a need, possibly, and this could be something that the provincial legislature could do, to have hearings to understand where the department will come and explain what is going on. Why have delayed payments happened now for 3 consecutive years in a row? What has happened? The department in previous years was able to be one of the best in the country to have now reached this state. Because I think we've got to get to the underlying problems and not just have these media outcries every year.
Lisa, finally, you speak of 3 years in a row where the same issues are being discussed. Now, all of that is coupled by the fact that as much as 102 million rand was sent back and unspent funds to Treasury. What's your reaction to that?
It's very, very concerning, because last year, roughly 230 million, also in NPO funding, was also returned to Treasury. And why this becomes so concerning is that Treasury then will turn around and say to the department, well, if you didn't spend this money, you obviously don't need it, so we're going to cut your budget. So it has a knock-on effect in that next year there may be less funding for NPOs. That is not NPO's fault. That is entirely the fault of the department's inability to underspend. And I think this already becomes a concern, because this year the department cuts the entire budget, and this is where some of the disputes are happening with the drop in census, by 192 million. So, I mean, they underspent last year by 102 million, and this year they're cutting by 192 million. It leaves organisations in a very, very precarious position. Plus, you also have to take into account that organisations, that because of the uncertainty and volatility of funding to the sector, there's been no increase to organisation services in terms of the funding amounts since 2022-2023. Inflation has gone up significantly. There are significant economic stresses in the country. This has absolute knock-on effects on organisations' ability to provide their services. And it also means that people have had no increases in 3 years. They're working on salaries that were barely fit for purpose 3 years ago. So to see money going back is a very bitter pill.
3 years in a row where funding delays are jeopardising NGOs' services to the vulnerable. Lisa Vetten, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us.